A deal on Dickens, who could resist? A stack of Austen, warmly kissed. Golden Age crime tales twist and turn, every page a treasure to learn. Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea, reading always feels so free.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I am doing this book review slightly out of order. I actually finished this, I want to say it was in January, late January. So I should actually have this review set for later. Actually might have been, yeah, I think it was late January. I should have this review set for later, but there was something that I said in the review of the Amelia Peabody book that I don't want to lose that thread that I had in my mind when discussing that book, so I'm going to do a review on this book now. And by this book, I am referring to the classic by Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird. And I will get into how that at all ties into a very different book in the Amelia Peabody book I was referring to last time. First of all, this is only the second time I've ever read To Kill a Mockingbird. I first experienced this in the classic movie with Gregory Peck. I don't know, for a second I was like, I see him in my head. Gregory Peck, who I love. Also, last time I talked about him, I think on a booktube video, was for his part in The Scarlet and the Black, which is a book I read last year, I want to say. So this is another book that I had also thoroughly enjoyed the movie, and I also watched the movie before reading the book of this one as well. So both of the Gregory Peck movies, I really enjoyed the movies, and I have enjoyed both of the books, Scarlet and the Black and To Kill a Mockingbird. First time I read To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't know how old I was. It was post high school. I want to say I actually searched it out myself. Must have read it as a library book though, because I don't have it on as a digital book, and I don't have the physical book. So that's actually kind of another tie back to my Elizabeth Peters book, where I talked about I thought I owned her Red Land, Black Land that she wrote under the name Barbara Mertz, but I couldn't find the physical book, and I couldn't find the digital book. So that also was something I experienced with this book. So I had to pick up another book for it. This is the 50th anniversary book. I picked this up for a book club that I was doing, that a YouTuber that I watched. She actually doesn't have a booktube channel. She talks about various other things in her channels, on her channels, but she was an English teacher when she was still teaching, long career as an English teacher, and this was one of her favorite books. So she hosted a book club for it, and what we would do is we would meet weekly in a Zoom meeting with, I think each group had like no more than 5, maybe 6 people. I think it was 6 people plus her, or 5 people plus her, something like that. And she did 2 groups a week. So each group had 1 day a week. And what she would do is she would read the section that she was going to go over. So she usually did like a chapter or 2 a week. So she would read a chapter, and then we would discuss. Although sometimes she would stop and we would discuss at that point if something hit her then that she wanted to bring up. So she would do a chapter, we'd talk, and then she'd do the next chapter and we'd talk. And we would have these really amazing discussions that really made me engage with this book in a way that I didn't the first time I read it. Because the first time I read it, I remember being a bit disappointed because it wasn't like the movie. And I think maybe I wasn't ready to truly experience this book in the way that it should be experienced. But having it in this discussion setting was amazing. And actually, my mom and I have pilfered that discussion format. Twice a week, we do our own book clubs where we have one fiction book we'll read together a week, and then we have one like religious book we'll read, and then we'll discuss that on that particular day, whichever book we happen to be reading that day. But like we did was done for my book club for To Kill a Mockingbird, we'll read it and then discuss while we're reading it, if it so happens to fit. But this discussion format worked very well for this type of book because there's so much going on in To Kill a Mockingbird. It covers everything besides the obvious stuff about the race relations at the core of the book. It has to deal with growing up. It has to deal with learning the world, not, first of all, learning as you're growing up, but also learning to see the world in a different way as you see people show themselves in not necessarily the best ways. Learning the first time you experience extreme disappointment and confusion, but also covering things like different class differences, different ways that people choose to separate themselves. Now, I find that not only is this book beautifully written, there are just some really lovely ways that Harper Lee chose to word her work. The way she chose to put together the sentences, to express the ideas. Some of them are just beautiful. Some of these, it just such beautiful writing. But also, it's very appropriate for the narrator that you're dealing with. And the reason why I bring this up is I came across an Instagram post where someone mentioned finishing To Kill a Mockingbird, and their complaint that they ended up giving it, I want to say they gave it like 3 stars, because their complaint was that characters like Calpurnia and Tom Robinson were not covered to the same depth. And I think they missed the point. The point of this book was not Tom Robinson's story or Calpurnia's story or any. This story is about this is the story about how Scout begins to see and understand the world. Yes, the backdrop of racism and her understanding of, or her coming to understand how people see and treat each other, and how that the people in her town treat people isn't right and doesn't make sense. That's a part of the story. But the core to the story is Scouts, and even to a certain extent, Gems, growing up and how they come to see the world. You can't go too far off into Tom Robinson's story or into Calpurnia's story or into some of these other stories. You even have a limited view of Atticus's story, because that's not the point. The point is Scout. The point is, even to a lesser extent, Gem. And that would be a different story. It would be, to a certain extent, it would be even a more dark story. I mean, there is darkness in this story because of the topic matter, but that is covered within, the overall theme of Scouts growing up. But seeing it through the view of a child, well, the adult remembering what the view of the child was, looking back on that, for Harper Lee to then change perspective and then gone more into these other storylines would have broken character. And so I feel that it was a flawed argument to lower the rating of this book because it was not felt that these other characters did not get the same focus as the white counterparts. If you want that story, maybe you should choose a different book, because that's not what this story is about. That's not the main point of this story. And that doesn't mean that it's doing the story wrong. It's just that that's not the theme of the story. That's not the main point. Because you also have, not only are they learning about grappling with ideas of molestation and abuse, they're also have a point where there's drug abuse discussed. There's a point where, of course, racism is addressed, and that's a huge part of the narrative, but that's not the point of the narrative. This book covers some heavy issues, also while covering education, what it's like, the way Scout's coming to see that her brother's world is going to be different than the way she experiences the world. And eventually, she kind of sees that that's okay as she matures. But yeah, I thought that was a flawed understanding of what is the true point of the book. If you only see this book from the lens that this is a story about racism, then you're missing so much of this book. You're missing so much that can be gleaned and appreciated from this book. Because there's so much gold in here, but you're seeing it through a narrowed lens if you only focus on that one storyline. And I'm not saying it's not an important storyline. It's a very important storyline. And it is woven throughout the story. But it is not the point. And I'd be interested if anyone else feels similarly, wow, that's a difficult word to say, apparently, about this book. Or if there are other people who really just see it as that being the point of the book, racism being the point of the book. Because I do feel like there are other stories that, like, the main point is the narrative of race relations. I haven't read Uncle Tom's Cabin yet, but from what I understand, that is basically the point of that book. And there are other stories that, okay, that's the point of that book. That's that person's story. Or if you even look at something like the movie The Help, where it's like, yes, you have the narrator type reporter character. Yes, you have her story, but the point of that story of The Help, that movie, is really the racism, inequality storyline. It's not the only or even the main point of this book. And I'm probably beating a dead horse with that. But I wanted to end with a quote that is one that I really love because it's stuck with me. A lot of things have stuck with me, honestly, in this book. There's so much that's good in this book. But, sorry, all my tabs. I can't wait to reread this. I could honestly turn right around and read this all over again. But okay, sorry. I was starting to read it again. So there's this section where a scout gets scolded. And this happens to a certain extent. This does happen in the movie as well, but it's not touched in the same extent. Where she gets scolded for already knowing how to read when she first goes to school because her father taught her and he doesn't know how to teach, is what she's told. So I mumbled that I was sorry and retired meditating upon my crime. I never deliberately learned to read, but somehow I had been wallowing illicitly in the daily papers. In the long hours of church, was it then I learned? I could not remember not being able to read hymns. Now that I was compelled to think about it, reading was something that just came to me, as learning to fasten the seat of my union suit without looking around, or achieving 2 bows from a snarl of shoelaces. I could not remember when the lines above Atticus's moving finger separated into words, but I had stared at them all the evenings in my memory, listening to the news of the day, bills to be enacted into laws, the diaries of Lorenzo Dow, anything Atticus happened to be reading when I crawled into his lap every night. Until I feared I would lose it, I never loved to read. One does not love breathing. And that's just a beautiful quote. There's so many beautiful or well-crafted quotes in this book. I am so annoyed that I did not appreciate or re-experience this book for so many years. I will not go long before I read this again. But absolutely amazing book. I highly recommend. Another thing that we really discussed a lot when covering this book was education. And this was something that was discussed a lot between me and Aaron of Book Zealots when we were covering My Dearest Friend with Abigail and John Adams. How much education at home, how important there being a reading environment in the home is. And this book discusses, sometimes overtly, but oftentimes through the way Atticus just interacts with his children, how he creates a learning environment in the home that'll go beyond just preparing them for the school day, for the school year, but go into preparing them for life and for becoming adults going into the world beyond. Giving them life skills and things that they will enjoy forever. So, great book. Like I said, I highly recommend it. And I actually highly recommend, if you do read it with somebody else who will not have a problem discussing difficult topics, because I understand that not everyone can calmly discuss some of the topics covered in this book. Not everyone wants to have those kind of discussions. So if you have someone in your life that would enjoy discussing some of the topics that surround Scout and that she has to learn to grapple with growing up, I would suggest reading this book with them and then discussing those topics with that person or with those persons. We happen to have a really great book club for this. None of us knew each other personally when we started the book club, but it was really, everyone went into it as we are discussing this and no one's feelings are going to get, really heated up because maybe someone doesn't hold the same point of view, or maybe they said something in a way that, oh, that's offensive or whatever. this was really just going to be, okay, this is a hot topic. Great, let's discuss. And this is a great first way for kids to experience some really heavy topics, because that's when a parent or teacher can say, okay, let's experience this first through literature, when it's still not something that's personally affecting you. Then when you go out into the world, you've already had your practice run. You've already thought of these ideas. You've already discussed these ideas. And then when you experience it firsthand, you're like, okay, I might not be ready for this, but at least I'm familiar with this. I've heard of this. I've discussed this in a way that is productive and even enjoyable. Thank you very much for joining me for this much longer book review than I intended to make it. And that means that's the only other book review I'll be able to get in tonight. I meant to maybe get in another one, but I rambled on too long about this very excellent book. So I will record again on a different day. I will see you then. You have a wonderful day, and God bless. Bye.
Books keep coming home with me. Piles so tall, they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea. Reading always feels so free.